Here is how the Jewish scribe manipulated Ishmael's story. 1. The age of Ishmael at the time of his departure from Abraham's house. 2. Abraham's son, who was offered as a sacrifice.
Some people think that Ishmael, when sent away by Abraham in the Torah, was just a young child, not a teenager, based on the phrase, "and he grew," in Genesis 21, verse 20. They point out that the Hebrew word yelid is used for both Ishmael and baby Moses, Exodus 2, verse 6. How do they explain this argument? The argument is articulated by pointing out the use of the Hebrew word yelid in both Genesis 21, verses 14 to 15, and Exodus 2, verse 6. In these verses, yelid is used to describe both Ishmael and infant Moses. Supporters of the argument claim that since yelid is used to describe Moses when he was an infant, it should also be understood to mean that Ishmael was still a young child in Genesis 21, verse 20. Additionally, the phrase, "and he grew," in Genesis 21, verse 20, is interpreted by some to imply that Ishmael was still in the process of growing and developing, suggesting a younger age. They argue that if Ishmael were already a teenager or older, it would not be necessary to mention his growth. It should be noted, however, that interpretations of biblical texts can vary, and different scholars or readers may have different understandings of the intended meaning.
Why are the statements about Abraham wanting to sacrifice his son in Genesis 22, verse 2 and verse 16 problematic? In one case, the son is referred to as the only, while in the other, the name of the son is not mentioned. The story of Abraham being tested to sacrifice his son in Genesis 22 has raised some interpretative questions and concerns among readers. Specifically, the statements as mentioned in verses 2 and 16 are problematic for a couple of reasons. First, in Genesis 22, verse 2, when God calls Abraham to sacrifice his son, Isaac is described as your only son. However, this raises a discrepancy because at that point Abraham already had an older son named Ishmael, born to Hagar. Ishmael was not mentioned in this context, leading to confusion regarding why Isaac was referred to as the only son. This linguistic inconsistency has led some scholars to suggest that the story might have been composed independently from other narratives that mention Ishmael. Secondly, in Genesis 22, verse 16, after Abraham successfully passes the test, and God intervenes by providing a ram as a substitute sacrifice, God blesses Abraham and says, "Because you have not withheld your son, your only son." This repetition of "your only son" raises another concern since Isaac's name is not mentioned. It seems that the narrative originally presents the unnamed and only son of Abraham, alluding to Ishmael, who lived as Abraham's only son for almost 14 years before Isaac was born. These discrepancies may be due to several factors, such as different sources or traditions being woven together, intentional theological messaging, or even potential editorial modifications over time. Scholars have examined these issues and proposed various explanations to reconcile the inconsistencies, but it remains a topic of debate and interpretation. Ultimately, the problematic nature of these statements arises from the textual and narrative intricacies within the story, which have led to questions about authorship, redaction, and theological implications.